And we're delighted to welcome President Marc Laredo, who is one of the two candidates running for mayor on the November 4th ballot. We'll spend an hour this morning with President Laredo and an hour tomorrow morning with Al Cicconelli, also at 9 a.m. I'll be moderating both of these conversations, asking questions, including many that have been suggested by chamber members. As I have advised the candidates, I may interrupt in the interest of time or for clarity, but we'll try to make this as much of a conversation as we can. I've only told the candidates two questions in advance. The first one we'll get to at the very end, which is I've asked them to tell us who would be on your Newton Mount Rushmore. Name four individuals from Newton's history that you would put on Mount Rushmore. We'll get to that one later. But Mr. Laredo, we want to start with question. Tell us a little bit about yourself, not why you want to be mayor, but just a little bit about your life journey and how you got to where we are today.
Sure. So I grew up in Newton. My parents were immigrants from Europe. My dad from Nazi Germany. My mom was a child survivor of a concentration camp. They moved here in the early 1960s. My brother, sister, and I all went to Cabot. We went to Bigelow. We went to Newton North. I did many of the things you do as a kid growing up here in the 60s and 70s, everything from working at the Pewter Pot restaurant in Newtonville to delivering newspaper route to working for the Parks and Rec Department for 4 summers, including at the Old Memorial School in Oak Hill Park for 3 of those summers. I went to Cornell undergrad, went to the University of Pennsylvania Law School. I met my wife, Roberta, at Cornell. She's from the distant town of Milton, and 34 years ago, I persuaded her that Newton was really a great place to live. We moved here. We've been in the same house since then. We have 3 kids, a daughter-in-law, a daughter-in-law to be, and a new grandchild who's 11 months old. And all 3 of our kids went through the Newton Public Schools. They went to Ward and Bigelow and Newton North. And our daughter-in-law actually went to Cabot Day and Newton North. So we have really strong ties with the community. I have thoroughly enjoyed living in this city. I think this is an absolutely wonderful place to live. We've been very fortunate to have made lots of friends here, to be active in the community. My wife is co-president of the Sisterhood at Temple Emmanuel, where we've belonged for now 25 years. And about, I guess it's over 20 years ago now, I decided to run for public office. And so I ran for the school committee, served on the school committee for 8 years, including as vice chair and then chair, was term limited out. And 2 years later, I was kind of getting bored not having some civic activity to do. And there was an opening on the city council from Ward 7. I ran from the Ward 7 seat. This is my 14th year on the city council. And I've been really fortunate enough to serve as chair of the land use committee for 4 years, president a number of years ago, and I'm again president this term of the council. It has been remarkably personally rewarding, fulfilling work, being able to make a difference, however small, in the community. But I'm not a career politician. I've been working for 40 years as a lawyer, most of that time in the private sector. I served briefly or for several years as an assistant attorney general in the criminal bureau of the attorney general's office. But for nearly the last 30 years, I'm co-founder and until recently managing partner of my law firm. I work with a lot of businesses, large and small, in a variety of issues: employment, contract disputes, family disputes. And so I really bring to the job as mayor, I think, 3 things that are not always in common. A personal story: I know the city well. Lengthy civic experience, so I know the branches of government well, but also a private sector background and focus. So I understand how things are done in the private sector as well. And I think the combination of all 3 will really serve me well as your next mayor.
Great, thank you. So let's go into wanting to be mayor, and let's admit it, we know you will be the next mayor. At a really difficult time for the city, but a particularly difficult time for the nation and for everyone. And you're going to come in. Last year was a very challenging budget year, including a really historic showdown between Mayor Fuller and the school committee, something we've never seen before. First, is the teacher's contract sustainable?
I'm sorry, Greg, could you just repeat that? I missed the last portion.
Is the contract that the teachers signed last year, is that sustainable for the city?
I think it is sustainable, at least in the near term. Obviously, you're going to have to negotiate new contracts going forward. You got to be very careful, and it's a very delicate balance. You want to make sure that your teachers and any union employees feel welcome, that they feel like they're rewarded for their service. At the same time, you have a finite amount of money, and it's a challenge to be able to negotiate a contract or series of contracts that will balance those competing needs. Part of it, I think, is really sitting down with the school committee and the superintendent and trying to think long range, collaboratively and cooperatively as to what you can do. I've actually, Greg, been starting that process now. I've been meeting with Superintendent Nolan, and will continue to do so to really make sure we completely understand what can be done and what can't be done over 3, 4, 5 years from now, because I do
So,
not think it was healthy to have the kind of pitched battles that took place several months ago.
right, so, but specifically, I'm trying to think about whether the contract that we have now is going to allow us to go forward with budgets, and including the first budget you'll need to do next year. And knowing especially that we're losing some federal support, or certainly options to federal support. Do you anticipate asking for a tax override of any sort during your first term?
I'm never going to say no to anything, but I don't think you ask for overrides lightly, whether it's for debt exclusion override, which tend to be easier to pass because voters see something tangible, or operating overrides. And to me, you've got to have really three factors in play. One, you've got to have some identifiable improvement or improvements that you're going to do with the money. Two, you've got to time it right. You can't do it in a time of recession. You can't do it in a time of high inflation. Frankly, you can't do it when you have a big pile of free cash sitting there. All of those things do not generate confidence in the voters. Third thing is the voters have to feel like I and my team have done a good job managing their money, that we're careful, that we're smart, that we're clear and transparent about what we can do and what we can't do. If all those factors are in play at the appropriate time, yes, you ask for an override, but you don't do it lightly because number one, lots of folks in the city will simply not vote for an override no matter what. That's been shown over and over again. But two, we have a lot of folks in the city who may be on fixed incomes, they may be struggling financially, and you have to be very careful. Every time you ask them for more money, whether it's in fees or taxes, you got to be very thoughtful about that. You cannot have a knee-jerk reaction and just say, well, we need more money, so I'm going to go out and ask the voters.
So, and will you step in to fund programs like programs that help low-income families, food pantries, the nonprofits, social service groups, all that are either have or at risk of losing federal dollars or dollars that trickle from the federal government to the state to our nonprofits?
Greg, that's a real challenge. And I think it's going to have to be done really on a case by case basis. If there's a particular cut, for example, we in city government are going to have to examine very carefully whether we can make up some or all of that cut. And I don't know the answer to that.
Right.
What I do know is we're going to have a laser-like focus on working with our nonprofits in the city to bring them together, to coordinate efforts, to cut their red tape to get things done, whatever that red tape may be. And we value those nonprofits. Several months ago already, Greg, I met with a number of nonprofit leaders throughout the city. It was very informative. There were some obviously differences among the different nonprofits, but there's some common themes too. One of the themes I think we will adopt as a new city government is our attitude is going to be how can we get something done rather than saying we can't do it. Now, it may be difficult to get it done, but if we approach things with that mindset and approach it with being able to help the nonprofits thrive, that's really good. And it's good for the business community because I think as you've talked about on multiple occasions, things like arts and culture are critically important to the business well-being of the city. They're also critically important to the strength of community in the city, which I think is very important and I take very seriously.
So, but no sense of how you would help them with the loss of funding that they're
You know, one of the things I've learned of the campaign trail is don't promise till you know exactly what the facts are and you've had an opportunity to analyze a particular situation. And I'm going to approach it the same way.
Okay, and it won't surprise you that we're going to spend a bunch of time this morning talking about housing, which is a top priority for the
Sure.
chamber. Governor Healy's goal, housing goal for Massachusetts, is to build 222,000 new housing units by 2035. It's kind of a two-part question here. Do you agree with that goal? And if so, what's Newton's responsibility?
You know, I think it's a reasonable goal. Newt has a responsibility, and there's also a lot of factors that are really beyond our control. So we passed the MBTA Communities Act. We actually went beyond the minimum requirements of the MBTA Communities Act. And we're starting to see some projects come into the city under that. I met with some developers very recently who proposed, I don't want to go into details, not fair for them till they announce it, but I thought it was a very exciting opportunity, well thought out. You know, some things that we suggested they may want to do to improve the project. There's always things that you do to improve projects. But I think generally that's good. What we can't control, Greg, and I've seen this in my private sector work, we can't control the cost of construction. We can't control interest rates. At least can't do that at the local level. We can't do something. We can't control tariffs. We can't control the price of steel. A lot of factors. We can have the most well-intentioned zoning ordinances and laws out there, but there's lots of other factors that go into play. Look, Riverside is a good example. We are now on Riverside 4. I voted for every single one of the Riverside projects, and we're still haven't built anything years and years later. I'm not finding fault with anyone for that, but there are lots of other forces in play. And there you had projects that were approved by the city council virtually unanimously. So I think we have a lot of work to do. I don't think it's going to be easy. We have a part to play in that, and I think we are playing that part.
So let me go back and ask you about MBTA communities, which is, it's been over a year now, I guess, since the city passed it or since we went through that process. So far, there, as you admitted, we've seen little. There may be some things on the horizon, but as you remember, we left out a number of villages. Originally, it was a citywide plan scaled back to exclude villages. Some people argued, let's see what happens and let's make sure that it's not a tsunami of new buildings happening there. Is it time to go back and look at those villages that were left out of that plan?
No, and let me tell you something, Greg. This is how I approach leadership, okay? I'm a big believer in trying to build consensus. And if you get 65, 75% of the people behind you and you get 70% of something, that's a great result. Why is it a great result? Because most people support it. You don't divide a community. You don't have some folks on one side saying you should do this, folks on the other side say we don't want anything at all. And you know what? If something works, you add to it. And if it doesn't work, you fix it or change it. So I think we have a ways to go. There's a lot of opportunities out there right now for developers in the city. They're starting to take advantage of that. I think it's going to take several years, and anybody who's in the development business knows it takes time to acquire real estate in the first instance. It takes time to get financing. It takes time, and financing, especially if you're building affordable, as you know, is very difficult because it's you have to go to multiple different sources to get the money. So you have a lot of things in play. I think we're going to see it play out. I think much of it, if not most of it's going to be really good. If some things aren't working well, we'll fix them. And that's the way I think you go.
Yeah. So let me ask you about this question of consensus. And as you pointed out, you voted for Riverside and you've supported a lot of these other housing projects. But I think a lot of the people who are most enthusiastic about seeing considerably more housing in Newton are very skeptical or nervous about your being elected mayor. They're worried that, you know, your constituents, the people that have backed you over the years, really have been folks who've opposed or been skeptical about building development. The city councilors who elected you president tend to fall on that side of the political line. Help us understand really where you are and how beholden you are to the housing folks or the people who've been more skeptical about building more housing.
I'm not beholden to anyone, Greg. I'm not beholden to Chamber of Commerce. I'm not beholden to Right Size Newton. I'm not beholden to Vibrant Newton. I'm not beholden to any of these groups. nor am I beholden to any member of the city council, although I certainly hope that I'll be working very closely with the city council because I think that's how you get things done. My track record speaks for itself. I voted in favor of, I think, every single significant development project in the city. I chaired the land use committee when we approved both Austin Street and Trio, very controversial projects. And you know what I'm most proud of, Greg? Not my votes, although I think I voted the right way. But what I'm proud of is that I don't think anybody really criticized how I ran the meetings, how I listened to people, how we got to the result. They may have agreed or disagreed with a particular vote, but the process, being inclusive, not lecturing to other people, making sure that everyone is heard, that's how you succeed. And that's what I'm going to do as the mayor. And look, I believe in development. I'll be very clear. We are going to develop in this city, period. It's healthy. We can't be stagnant. But at the same time, we always need to be cognizant of the folks who are living right next door to whatever project it is and try to accommodate their needs as much as we can without sacrificing a project. But I think it's critically important for us not to be dismissive of those folks, because then you create a city that's very divided. You know, I've been going door to door, Greg, and that's illuminating, because you don't hear the advocacy groups, whatever side of the issue. You don't just hear the advocacy groups, but you hear the folks who are living in the city, and they may be living in very modest housing, and they may be living in very opulent housing. And you listen to them and you listen to their concerns, and that's eye-opening. And what I hear a lot is people want consensus. They want us to work together. They don't want us pitting our one against the other. That's how I'm going to lead the city, and that's how we're going to get results.
And how can we, or should we, speed up the process? Getting approval for a project takes a long time, and often, as we've seen really recently, the economy shifts, and suddenly that project doesn't pencil out anymore, whereas that project could have been well in the ground and being built. How do we fix that? How do we address that challenge?
You know, it's a challenge that I've been looking at since I started my tenure as chair of the land use committee, which is quite some time ago. When we did that work, it was really interesting. We found that much of the delay in getting projects approved was not at the city council level, but was really in not streamlining our internal administrative processes. And I will commit firmly that we are going to review all of our internal processes so that we are not going, for example, from Department A to Department B to Department C to Department D to approve something. And everyone gets 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 weeks to do that. That causes huge delay. I will commit to sitting down with the developers and their lawyers, and I've been doing that. What are your concerns? What works well at City Hall? Where are the delays? At the same time, and you see this less with the very large projects, developers will be far more successful if they start off by going out and talking to the neighbors about their project. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen somebody come in with a medium-sized project in particular to the land use committee, and they haven't even bothered to talk to their neighbors. Their neighbors show up at the meeting, and I see my colleagues Andrea Kelly and Rick Lipoff here. I'm sure they can attest to that. And the neighbors are very upset. Why? Because no one's talked to them. That's basic 101 as far as I'm concerned. Because when you talk to people, when you have genuine dialogue with people, when you listen to people and you try to address their concerns, you'll do better. But Greg, I am going to welcome the participation of the chamber. I'm going to welcome the participation of the development community. I want to hear where the stumbling blocks have been and what we can do to make it easier. And if we need to change certain zoning laws, such as parking requirements in village centers, for example, I'm open to that. Because I'll give you an example. If we are waiving a requirement with every single special permit, and we do with some of the village center parking, then it's probably not a good requirement in the first place. So I think there's lots of ways you can do it, but it's a cooperative effort. And I, having come from the council, I will work very closely with council leadership in that regard, because I think if we work collectively, we all do a better job and we deliver a better product.
So, and are you suggesting that we should get rid of the parking requirements, waive the parking requirements for
No,
those?
no, I'm suggesting that we look at it carefully. In some places, it probably doesn't make sense. But at the same time, you then have to make sure that you have adequate public parking in a village center so that folks can come there. Because if I want to go to the West Newton Cinema from where I live on a January evening, and then maybe my wife and I go out for dinner, we're probably going to drive. And if we're going to drive there, we need a place to park our car on that January evening. So we have to look at it holistically. We can't say people are never going to drive. And by the way, I hear that over and over and over from the business owners all over the city who are concerned about that, and rightly so. And so you have to work as a partnership. How do we, as a city, help meet that need? Make sure that we're providing for that ability for people to get there, at the same time not creating requirements that we routinely waive.
Thank you. One last question about housing. This one comes from a resident who asks, what will you do for renters? I'm not unusual in paying 40% of my income and having lived in 4 apartments in the last dozen years, moving each time with immense stress because I want to keep my kids in their schools and there are very few options. In 2026, I'll become an empty nester and I'm wondering whether I should downsize in Newton or leave it. What do you say to that person?
I certainly hope that individual decides to stay in Newton. I'll start right there. We are building apartments in Newton. We're going to build more. There's no doubt about that. Some of them will be affordable, at least affordable under state standards, and that's good. That's going to provide housing for the most needy in our community, which is something I always think we should be focusing on with government resources. How do we help those most in need? So it's there. It's a challenge. We certainly have an obligation to make sure that our landlords are providing safe housing, that they're obeying fair housing laws, all of those things. I actually think we do a pretty good job with that, but there's always room for improvement. I can't control market rents in the city of Newton, and that I'm simply not going to be able to do. Although obviously, if you build more apartments, you probably are going to see some either stabilization, most likely stabilization in rents, but it does depend on what the mix of apartments is like too.
How do you feel about the proposed state ballot question that would allow rent control? Would you support that in Newton?
I'm not in favor of that, Greg, and I'll tell you why. It sounds great, okay? But things like that tend to have a couple of consequences that I really don't like, and some are unintended consequences. One, I think it really discourages any landlord from fixing or rehabilitating their units, and that's a mistake in my view. Someone looks at that and says, I'm not going to put any money into the unit. I'm going to keep it at the very basic level. The second thing, and it's probably even more troubling, is it's not targeted at the right people. You can be of a pretty high income, and there's lots of examples of that. You live in a rent-controlled unit, you stay there for 20 years, and you don't need that support. Meanwhile, there's an individual in our community who may make half or a third of the money you do, but didn't luck into how to get into that rent-controlled unit, and so doesn't benefit from that at all. So I think I would much prefer, and my philosophy of government is, we have finite resources. And with finite resources, you need to help the most vulnerable in your community. That's where you start when you're trying to help folks.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move on to some more general questions.
Sure.
First one is, will you allow the Italian flag lines to return to Adam Street?
I think we're going to figure out a way to get that done.
All right, and related to that, do you think that Mayor Fuller has a vendetta against Nonantum or the Italian community?
Oh, I'm not going to, that's not a fair question. I'm not going to comment anything negatively on Mayor Fuller. I will say this, Mayor Fuller is a good person. Mayor Fuller has worked very hard. Mayor Fuller should be proud of certain accomplishments she's had in the city. And there's things we disagree on. There's style, we have somewhat different styles, and that's natural. I would think every single mayor is going to have a style that's somewhat different than his or her predecessor.
Yeah, but not commenting is kind of not commenting whether or not she's had a vendetta, which is she's been accused of, that she somehow has something out for Nonantum or the Italian community. Not commenting on that is commenting on it.
No, Greg, I don't think it is. I don't attribute ill motives like that to anybody. She made a decision. I happen to disagree with the decision. I've told her I disagree with it both privately and publicly. She made the decision. I give everyone the benefit of the doubt that they make their decisions in public life based on good faith and what they think is the best interests of the community. We just happen to differ on this one.
So, but you don't think it's because she has something against that community?
Greg, I think I just answered the question.
Okay. Should we, when elected, will you keep the parklet in Newton Center or restore that parking?
That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to that yet. I can tell you this, it costs like $300,000 to build that parklet, including apparently a couple $100,000 of consultant fees. I was just in Roslindale last weekend with my granddaughter and my wife. They have a nice little parklet on a side street in Roslindale with games and chairs and beautiful. My guess is it cost a fraction of the amount to put together. Personally, I think you could have built something like that. There's a very large green area that also is actually fairly heavily used if you go to Newton Center, and you could have done it for a fraction of the amount. The other thing is, I think that's a lesson in how not to put something out to the public. Rather than say, I've decided to do something, here's what we're going to do. I have ARPA funds. There's no check and balance on it. Instead, start off by saying, hey, I've got this idea, and go talk to the business owners. What do they think? And be open about different ways of doing it. I love the idea of community spaces in village centers. I think they're critically important. I'm not sure I would have spent the kind of money it took us to spend on that parklet. And frankly, Greg, I don't know what we're going to do with all that equipment in the winter months. We're not going to be able to keep it up, most likely. And whether we could redeploy that in a different manner in the spring, keeping the parklet type concept, which I think is really nice, but thinking about it differently.
When elected, will you keep the Washington Street pilot project?
So look, I think the Washington Street pilot project has done some great things. Okay. I really personally like the bike lane a lot. I went out, I've driven there. I took my bike out a couple of different Sundays on the bike lane there, the dedicated bike lane there. I thought it was great. It's safe. You're not worried about cars in a very busy area. And obviously, it's going to facilitate biking to Newton North High School from West Newton to Newtonville. With that said, there's two things that really concern me about that. One, there is no source of funding to make this permanent. And to make it permanent, at least under the current design, I've been told is $25–30 million. That's a real problem. Are we going to keep something that's meant to be temporary for 10, 15, 20 years? Two, I think there was some legitimate concerns raised by folks, especially in Newtonville and West Newton. And this is a type of thing you hear a lot when you knock on doors, when you talk to individual residents. They find driving down Washington Street, which is kind of a zigzaggy pattern, confusing. They're worried about the fact that there's parking, at least on the south side, that makes it difficult to maneuver, makes it difficult to exit your vehicle. So look, it's an experiment. I'm open to continuing the experiment, but you got to look at it really carefully. And you got to look at it with an objective lens. And I think that's also very important. So that's something we're going to look at very closely. Like I said, there's some really good things that have come out of it, particularly the bike lane. I think the safer crossings at various points is very positive, but there's still work to be done, and it's not insignificant.
And when elected, how will you respond to federal directives that could harm vulnerable populations in Newton, particularly immigrants?
So, my job as mayor is not to set foreign policy. So I may have lots of opinions on Ukraine, for example, but it's not my job for the city of Newton to start setting foreign policy. But when the federal government comes into Newton, we do have a responsibility. We have a moral responsibility. I am quite comfortable with our Welcoming Cities Act. I've talked to our police chief directly. I've talked to our city solicitor directly. I'm comfortable that what we do is the right thing. I don't believe police officers should be walking around with masks. That's not how we do things in the United States of America. And I do think, as your mayor, while my focus will be local, as it should be, and nonpartisan, as it should be, I do have an obligation to speak up when there are things that are against the democratic values that we hold dearly, at least I hold dearly, and have all my life.
Thank you. Let's assume now you're elected, you're in Washington, D.C. for some council and mayor's meeting. You get into an elevator and there's Donald Trump, and you have 60 seconds to get to wherever he's going or you're going to tell him something. What do you tell him?
You know, I somehow I doubt the Secret Service is going to let me anywhere near Donald Trump
Well,
on
let's
an
say yeah.
elevator, but I'll assume for the sake of argument that I've gotten by the Secret Service. Look, it depends on the moment. I mean, I personally, if it's a casual, how are you? You know, you don't launch into yelling at somebody or being upset with someone in a 60-second elevator conversation. You greet them, you show respect for the office of President of the United States, just like you show respect for governors. I believe that very strongly. If you wanted to ask my opinion on something, I'd be very happy to share it. And I'll tell you two things that I find particularly disturbing, not about leaving aside policy, but one, I believe very strongly to the core in democratic values, in the importance of democracy, in not having any kind of authoritarian regime. I very much worry about that right now in this country. And in the city of Newton, we are not going to have that type of government. The second thing that I think is critically important is how we communicate. I'm not going to be tweeting in all capital letters. I'm not going to be calling my colleagues names. I think that's disgraceful. And I don't think that's at all productive. That doesn't mean that there are not going to be differences and sharp differences among leaders in city government. That's fine. And I expect at times people will get mad, they'll lose their temper, things happen. And that's okay. But at the fundamental core, you have to recognize that you need to treat other people with respect, even if you don't agree with them. Disagreement is very healthy in a democracy, but you need to do it with respect, and you need to do it with respect for the core vision of what democratic government's all about.
Thank you. Before I want to ask you one more question about what it would be like if you were elected. As you know, in the mayor's office, there's a bowl of Fig Newtons sitting in the mayor's office. So they're free to anybody. Would you maintain the tradition of free Fig Newtons if you were mayor?
You know, I think free Fig Newtons are wonderful. I do have to say, my wife's a dietitian, so we're always conscious about what we eat. I want to make sure it's nutritious, but I think the Fig Newton is pretty nutritious, at least nutritious enough for me. Yes. And if there's other, you know, Greg, if there's other little things we can do to make City Hall more welcoming, even in small ways, we should do that. Because I want people to come to City Hall. It's their place. They own it. The residents and businesses who are in the city own City Hall. And we work for them. And that's the kind of mentality I have. So you are now inviting people into a home. You want them to feel comfortable and welcome.
Okay, that's a good answer to bring us to our next category, which is competitiveness. How do we make Newton more welcoming to businesses? How can you improve Newton's reputation for permitting? And frankly, we have a bad reputation for not being friendly to businesses.
So I am keenly aware of that, Greg, and we are going to have a very different approach to economic development in my administration. Okay, it's going to start by being proactive. Right now, I think we've been in a very reactive mode in terms of economic development for many years now. We need to be proactive. And what does that mean? It means that I'm out, but probably even more importantly, my team is out talking to the local business owners in the city. But it's not just the local business owners, it's the commercial landlords, because they're the ones who are renting properties. What do they need? What will make them successful? It's partnering and talking and listening to the chamber and other business organizations in the city. So you start by going out and really listening to what people have to say. What's working well? What's not? Has Newtonville, for example, with its improvements, and I like those improvements, by the way, has that been successful? What could be done differently? If you had to do it over again, what would you do differently? That's number one. Number two, we have to be far, far, far better at promoting ourselves as a destination for someone who's either looking to start a business from scratch, looking to move from elsewhere in the Commonwealth, looking to move or set up another operation elsewhere in the country, and not be afraid to look internationally. I mean, we have a wealth of talent and ability in this city, and we should be extraordinarily attractive to that. Let me add something else that I think is critically important. We are going to have a separate arts and culture department in the city. And there's a reason for that, because I view arts and culture as critically important to our economic well-being in the city. And it also, good arts and culture, promoting arts and culture also builds a sense of community. And when you have a sense of community and people feel really good about the place they live, and somebody's looking to start a business or move here, all of that comes into play. That's not the end of it. We have a lot to do at City Hall. I want to make sure that if you come to City Hall and you're looking to set up the proverbial coffee shop, you need to be able to get through City Hall quickly. Doesn't mean we don't have a health inspector look at your business to make sure that you're using the proper techniques. I mean, that's for all of our well-being and safety, but there's no excuse for it taking 4 or 6 weeks to get done. And I will not, that's something I will not tolerate. I'll be very tolerant of people making mistakes. We're human, it happens. I won't be tolerant of poor customer service. And we are going to, and that's going to be a mentality that we have throughout the city. And I think that's going to make us more welcoming to businesses.
A number of communities across the state have offered tax incentives, property tax incentives to bring a company to their community, including Needham, which lured both TripAdvisor and NBC 10 from Newton to Needham, in part at least because of a tax break. Would you be open to offering a TIF in Newton for a company?
You know, I'm always open to everything, Greg. I think you got to look at it very carefully. I think if you look at tax breaks like that historically across the country, they don't tend to be particularly effective. The company may move there for a few years and then, go out of business or merge or something else happens and you don't get the benefit you thought you were going to get. I'm also concerned with the concept of government playing favorites among different businesses. I think you have to be very careful about that. You want a level playing field. You don't want the city of Newton saying, you're my favorite company, you're going to get a leg up over someone else.
Newton has adopted ambitious climate goals. What's your plan, or how do we make sure that the city can meet those goals and do what we need to do to address climate change while remaining competitive to communities that don't have such strict rules?
You know, that's a really important question. We have done a very good job addressing climate change in the city. We're a leader. We're a leader in the region. We're a leader statewide. We're probably a leader nationally as well. We can't lose sight of the fact that certain things we want to accomplish have cost for businesses. If we add 5%, to make a number up, to the cost of building a housing unit for a nonprofit developer, we may tip the balance there between making the project financially feasible and making it unfeasible. So I think it's really incumbent upon us as we embark on those things to be very careful that we're doing the proper analysis. So we're at the cutting edge. I think that's good environmentally, but we can't do it to the point where we undercut some of our other goals, such as making sure we're building affordable housing. And that's a constant challenge. There's not a right answer to that, but I think that's something in city government we need to be cognizant about.
Okay. Under your watch as council president, a request by the chamber to speak in a meeting about the office market and the challenges in the office market was denied. You're the council president. You're in charge of the council. Why didn't you step in and insist that the business community be heard at that meeting?
Well, Greg, the council president, despite your belief that I have tremendous power, I think at least my two colleagues who are on the call will attest to the fact, and I see former colleague Representative Schwartz as well and Councilor Maliki, the president doesn't have quite that level of power that you think he does or she does. In fact, the job of the council president is to appoint the committee chairs, to kind of oversee the administration of the council. But I think quite rightly, we reserve to the committee chairs how they run their committees and how they run their meetings. And while in a particular instance, you might be dissatisfied with that, I actually think for the health of city government, that's a much better approach. We don't want to be like other legislative bodies where the president dictates how things are done at the council. That is a very undemocratic form of leadership. And I've always taken the belief that I'll work with my the chairs, whom I've appointed along with Vice President Kalis, but it's their committees. They run them. They make the decisions how they're run. And I know, Greg, you felt, I know were not happy that were not heard that night. I think there are explanations as to why that took place. I certainly expect going forward, there'll be plenty of opportunities for all kinds of public participation, including participation by the chamber.
I think there are some of your colleagues who will say that you actually are much more hands-on with your committees than you may be saying now. But let me ask you this instead. Did you agree with the decision?
Greg, I respected the decision. I'll tell you why. Okay. Typically, we do not have public hearings in committees unless there's a scheduled public hearing. And we often do not take testimony or comments from various interest groups. We did that night hear from the EDC, and the EDC is very different. The EDC is actually a governmental body appointed by the mayor, approved by the city council, and has a specific role to play in our city government. So again, I understand your displeasure with that. I think you've made that known on multiple occasions, as you're absolutely entitled to. But I think the chair of the committee was well within his discretion in terms of how he decided to run the meeting. And I really hope that was not intended as any sign of disrespect for you or the chamber. Quite the contrary. I think the chamber in particular, and you as its leader, I think have been heavily involved in talking to city leaders. And I think that's very healthy because you have a very important point of view to convey. I'm, for one, I'm respectful of that. I'm respectful of the role the chamber plays. I've sat down under your auspices with the real estate group, with the restaurant owners group, and I fully expect to be meeting on a regular basis with others. It's a very important constituency in the city. We want you to succeed.
So thank you for that. You talked about how you want to make sure City Hall remains welcoming and people feel ownership for it. And a little bit about how you might reorganize it, but tell us more about what you might reorganize in City Hall and how you might do things differently.
Look, let me be clear. I'm not someone who's looking to do any kind of wholesale replacement of folks at City Hall. Quite the contrary. I actually think we have very, very good city employees, whether it's police, fire, DPW, assessing, law, you name it. They're good. They're hardworking. We need to be supportive of them. And we have good leadership. So the thing I want to do is a couple things. One, I want to make sure that all our employees feel supported. And I say this often, if they make a mistake, I own it. My problem. If they're successful, I'm happy to give them as much credit as they want because they did a good job. That's my leadership style. I think it's very important. And things do go wrong. Things are mistakes. Here's what I won't tolerate, though. I won't tolerate not being responsive. I'm in a customer service business. For 30 years, I've been, helping run my law firm. And there's a quickest way to not make any money, and that's not be responsive to your clients or your customers. Really simple. And anybody who's been in any kind of service business knows that. or even in the construction business, or whatever, you still need to be responsive. And I think every single person at City Hall needs to have that mentality. So if you call and you have a problem and you don't get a response within a couple of days, even if the response is, I'm away on vacation this week, I'll get to it next week, or I'm on vacation this week, but my colleague down the hall will handle it. That is critically important. And that's something we're going to be doing, and we're going to repeat and repeat and repeat, because that's the way we run city government. And I think that's critical.
If you could add one new public service or amenity to Newton with unlimited funding, what would it be? Just one, please.
I'm sorry, Greg, what?
One amenity, one public service, one thing to the city where you didn't have to worry about the cost.
That's a terrific question, and I'm not sure I have a ready answer for it, because there's so many different things I'd want to do. And if cost was no object, it would be great. I guess I would think about providing better internal transportation in the city so that people can get around by some intra-city transportation as best as possible. We have some of that now, but it's not sufficient. I hear that especially from our elderly, some of whom may not drive much or at all anymore. You certainly hear that from kids. So if we could have one improvement, I think that would be very healthy for the vitality of the city and beneficial to many residents.
Okay, we're in the home stretch here, but a couple more questions for you, and maybe you can try to keep them as short as you can. When you look around at other communities, what's an attribute another community has that you wish Newton had?
So I'll give you an example. I think Lexington has done a really good job with some of their development in Lexington Center. I think that's really nice. I wish we did that better. Wellesley, I think, has done a very nice job in its town center. I think that's worked out very well. I wish we did that better. Part of my job. Oh, and by the way, I really like Watertown's the new Arsenal Mall. I think that's been a terrific development. Very good for the city in a whole host of ways. Combines business, it combines housing. It's a place for people to go. Very successful by all accounts. Part of my job is to, if I become mayor, is to go out and partner with other communities and really look at best practices, not just in the region, but in the country. And people have been sending me information about that as I go along, and I read a lot of it, or all of it actually, and I find it very interesting. And we'll try to continuously look at best practices elsewhere, because we're not going to solve all the problems on our own, and other people have solved it. We should try to look to them.
Great, thank you. All right, one last question before I ask you about your Newton Mount Rushmore. Why do you think it is that no serious candidates stepped up to run against you?
Look, Greg, I went out really early, okay? I worked very hard. I raised money early. And I hope that the voters in the city feel that I have a proven track record, that I have the right personal experience to do the job. I mean, this has been my home for most of my life. I know the public schools, which are critically important to people. I know them well as a product of the schools, consumer of the schools, and leader of the schools. I think I have a good track record as a leader in the city. May not always agree with me. That's fine. But I think people also recognize that I'm going to be laser focused on what's better for Newton. I'm not looking for another job when I'm done with this. I can assure you of that. This is most likely going to be my last job in life. And so, I just want what's best for the city. And I truly don't care about getting the glory or the credit for it. I know that sounds trite, but I don't. I'll know if I've done a good job. I'll know if I leave the city when I'm done serving in a better place, and I'll be hopefully very proud of that. I think all those things factor in, and I put together my team quickly. And when, Ruth Ann Fuller decided not to run again, folks who had been supportive of her before quickly joined my team, which I think was very positive. Greg, I'm taking nothing for granted. This is still an election. I still have an opponent. I need the votes. And I am out there every day. I was at Golda Meir House yesterday afternoon. I spent Labor Day knocking on doors in Ward 4. I've been all over the city meeting people at coffees, at public events, one-on-one, because I need to earn their confidence and trust. And it's not something you just get. So I'm going to work very hard between now and Election Day. And I'm going to work very hard if elected to do the same thing.
Are you planning to keep your law firm open while you're?
So I am not allowed to continue the practice of law, at least in the private sector, if elected. So we have a transition plan at my law firm. My name has to go off the door, actually. But between now and December 31st, I'm balancing 4 jobs, Greg. I'm practicing law. I'm city council president. I'm thinking about next year. And of course, I'm running a campaign. And, no pity for me. I brought this all on myself, and I love every minute of it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for all that. All right. So who would be on your Newton Mount Rushmore? Tell me 4 individuals from Newton's history that you would put up there.
That was a great question. And I really went back and thought, and, we have Nobel Prize winners here. We have religious leaders here. We have some great leaders in the past who helped build things, schools in the city. But I came up with 4 people. But unlike Mount Rushmore, they're not, in fact, none of them are politicians. And I did that deliberately. So let me give you 4 examples. And I could have given you 24 more people. Number 1 is Horace Mann. Why is Horace Mann important? Because, of course, he is considered in many ways a father of American education. He was really fought for public schools. I happen to think public schools are the lifeblood of our democracy. That's number 1. Number 2, Catherine Lee Bates. I go to Newton North High School every year for graduation. I've been there since I graduated. I won't say how many years ago, but suffice to say a heck of a long time. And of course, America the Beautiful, which has been authored by Catherine Lee Bates, is sung every year at graduation. And I think that's a nice way of thinking about it. Third is someone who actually is still alive. Nancy Schoen, who of course we know made the sculptures in front of the library, the Winnie the Pooh sculpture and the other. And of course, in the Boston Common, the Make Way for Ducklings statue, which, frankly, I love Make Way for the Ducklings. I've read it to all 3 of my kids. I'm looking forward to reading it to my granddaughter. And I just think that's just an absolutely wonderful story. And she brings something that's very special artistically to the city. And the 4th person would be Lenny Zakem. And as you know, Lenny Zakem was a political activist. He was a human rights leader in Newton. He passed away far too early. We name at Newton North the Human Rights Award for him every year. And I like to think that those 4 people represent different things and bring different things to the city. And I think they'd be wonderful people to have on our Mount Rushmore. And like I said, we could probably find 50 more people very easily who could do the same.
Wow, that's a really good answer there. Thank you. And thank you for all this. I really appreciate it. You put up with me over the years, and I look forward to having you put up with me in many years to come, and more seriously, collaborating with the business community at a really essential time for all our businesses and nonprofits.
Well, thank you, Greg. And as I've told you repeatedly, I don't think it's putting up with you. I think it's working with you, because the chamber under your leadership, I think has done an extraordinary job in growing and being a very vocal and vital force and voice for businesses in the community. And I think that's to all of our benefits. So I'm looking forward to many, many conversations ahead.
Great. Thanks very much. All right, we have a couple minutes left. I'll give you a chance to give one final pitch to voters, or tell people something we didn't get to.
So look, I'm gonna ask for your vote on November 4th, because that's the starting point. If you don't ask the voters for their vote, you don't get their vote. And I hope I'll earn your trust and your trust in me, that I'll get your vote on November 4th. Look, as I said earlier, I love this city. This has been my home for most of my life. I think I bring the right skill sets at the right time to bring this community together, to work with each and every one of you to make this an even better place to live and work. Again, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. If anybody wants to get back to me and give me feedback or questions on anything I've said, please go to my website, www.laredofornewton.com. very happy to answer any questions. And again, Greg, thank you so much for the opportunity.
And thank you very much for the opportunity and knowing that there'll be Fig Newtons in our future. So thank you.
Big Newtons are there, I
All
promise.
right. Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody for participating. Reminder that tomorrow we will talk to Al Cicconelli at 9 a.m. also via Zoom. And this video will be shared as soon as it's available. Thank you.